Hi. Happy Thursday. What is today? Thanks for coming to the last slot of the afternoon. I know there can be other tempting things to do here in New Orleans, but we appreciate that everyone's here. To kick us off, Joe was going to share a little bit of a background about Sunbasket and give you some understanding of where they've come and how they've gotten to where they are today. So for that, I'll hand it over to Joe.
Hey, sweet. Hi, guys. I'll go into a little bit of who I am in a second, but first I wanted to actually go into who is Sunbasket, just in case anyone here doesn't know who we are. So we are a meal kit delivery service on par with Blue Apron or HelloFresh's. We specifically feature organic and healthy food. We were the first to kind of go organic certification. We always keep it clean, so these are kind of our core tenets that we operate as a business. So certified organic, only antibiotic-free, sustainable farming. We really focus on flavor first, so our chefs are James Beard Award winners. We have nutritionists and dietitians on staff. We take it very seriously. We curate kind of exceptional seasonal produce, so like black garlic and kind of odder things that might not be available across geolocations. And then finally, sustainability. I think that obviously being in the box world and being a healthy organic box, it's kind of hard when you're sending out these boxes every week with a whole bunch of packaging. And so we've done a lot of work to make sure that everything is recyclable or compostable, especially depending on where you are in the country. Where we are now as a company, so we were founded in 2015 in our CEO's living room, along with about 5 other folks. Over the course of the last 4 years, we've grown to about 160,000 active users and a little over 500 million in revenue. We were West Coast specifically when we first started. We're now we hit everywhere except Hawaii and Alaska. We've got 4 major distribution centers across the country and just installed a really, really cool technology called Pick-to-Light that's really going to change us and kind of puts us in an Amazon-esque warehousing situation. Where we are in a marketplace, right? So that's great. This is a really crowded market. As I mentioned, we are not the biggest players, as you can see. So that would be Blue Apron and HelloFresh, who everybody knows. We are just 10% of the market. So when I don't want to make it sound like I'm a market leader. We are not the market leader in the meal kit world, but we are the market leader for the quality of users in the meal kit world. And I'll get to that in just a second. But the reason why we get to the quality, and we're not necessarily market share, is that we take this approach to kind of our marketing. So the first is always to focus on our high value and make sure that the lifestyle matches. So I think early on we started with a very direct response, grow, early adopters. And now we're at a point where, no, we are willing to pay slightly more for the right lifestyle and the right fit. Scale responsibly. We obviously need to hit a certain volume. You can get really high quality audiences. Getting them at volume is the hard part. So that's kind of our second kind of objective. And then our third is really how do we differentiate our product offering. So in the last 4 years, we've had 1 SKU, and that's been great. And so we've grown really high on 1 product offering, basically. I mean, it's dinner, but 1 product. So how do we expand? Is it breakfast? Is it lunch? Is it a marketplace? Is it fully cooked meals? There's kind of a whole table that we haven't addressed, and we've only hit 1 corner. And so that's kind of where we put ourselves at, to command a premium position within the market by dominating a core lifestyle, not necessarily being the biggest meal kit subscriber in the country, but being the best meal kit subscription in the company or in the country. And is it working? I mean, yeah. If we look at our average first year spend on meal kits, we're hitting close to about $900 per user on average. Within the marketplace, again, if we, just looking at the market leaders, Home Chef and Blue Apron, they were coming in about 600. So about a 300 average difference between users. And that's saying a lot because, in this business, getting people to stay longer than a month is kind of hard, right? 55% of people typically churn, and that's on one order a month boxes. I'm talking a weekly box that's about $80. So pretty wicked intense. So how we get there. Or kind of what is my full marketing tactic, or kind of the funnel that we look at. We take a full funnel tactic, and this is new, and we're going to chat about this in a second of how we're evolving. But ideally, we started and built the company on the middle section of the funnel, targeted prospecting, which is really just getting in those early users, making lookalike models based off of those early users, and collecting as much data as possible. Now that we've got about 3 to 4 years of rich data, we're able to make a whole bunch of forecasts and models that allow us to then go up the funnel for cheaper conversion pieces, so going after registrations or cost per views, as opposed to conversions. And then further down the retargeting method. So instead of hitting just people who came to the site in the last 30 days, breaking it into like a whole ecosystem. I think I have like 72 different audiences within retargeting. And so that's Sunbasket. That's kind of how we approach things. That's where we sit. What I do, so who am I? So I am one of the growth experts on the team. We have 2 of us in the user acquisition house. We split retention and user acquisition in 2, and so I sit on the UA side. I'm a small cog in a big machine. I think we all know how that feels. In terms of channels, I oversee our SEM affiliates, paid social, direct mail, and display. And personally, I specialize in personalized user acquisition, so hitting different messaging at the different functions of the funnel. The growth retention mix, so it's great to get them in the door, but how do you maximize that AOV and ensure that they stay? Because that's really the key to success in subscription. And then full funnel attribution. So it's great to have last click attribution when you're going after direct response, but if you're going to accurately scale new channels, you have to understand how they play into the full customer journey. And really just start playing with the bid impressions. So some of the things that I would like to chat about today, or we can cover, or some of the key challenges that I'm going to talk about, is how we're evolving from direct response to full funnel, because I think we hear about it a lot, and it is painful. So I've got some stuff to share there. The balancing between quality and filters. So how do you get those high quality users but at scale, right? So we have to hit a certain number of users every week to make up for churn, and they have to be high quality. So how do you balance those 2 things? How do you differentiate? So this is a huge one. There are about 32 different competitors for us, and we actually just hired a CMO, and her first day on the job, she got up and was like, here's our Instagram. And then showed every single one of our competitors' Instagrams, and every single one of them was the same. And so that is a huge piece for us, is how do we change and how do we evolve from that? We started and we're really good at the food porn, but how do we move away from that? And then finally, like, how do we move away from our current mix? Like, we're really dependent on SEM and on affiliate and on paid social, especially Facebook, right? And it's a scary place to be with that much of our media spend on Facebook. Like, if something were to happen there, there goes a good 30-40% of my user acquisition a week. So how do I get away from that so I'm not dependent on one channel so solely? So yeah, that's where we're at, and that's what we're gonna hopefully chat about.
Thanks, Joe, for the background.
Yeah.
So we wanted to dig into a bit to the growth challenge, because obviously it's a challenge that's very common in the business, and that Sunbasket has really gone through. And the big transformation, I think, when LQ Digital started working with you guys, I remember we had meetings in closets in apartment buildings, because that's kind of where they were at. And now you're quite a large company. So kind of with that, can you give us a bit of an overview of how have your key metrics that govern your business, what are they, and how have they changed over the years?
Yeah. Okay. So I would say that. So at the end of the day, revenue is always the key driver. So users in, users out. We just have to hit a revenue marker at this point. But I would say that from a marketing standpoint, probably about 7 months ago, it was all CAC. So what was the cost per user acquisition? How do we get that smaller? All of the modelings were dictated on this is how many users we need. This is the maximum amount of CAC that we're willing to pay on a blended kind of standpoint. And that was what was used to look at every channel. And so you would look at it and say, like, hypothetically, the CAC goal from a financial model was $80. And then we would look at every channel and judge if it was successful based on whether or not it was able to deliver the $80 CAC, which was successful at the time, and it made scaling channels really easy. But the problem is that it's not possible to stay at an $80 CAC forever. That might be great for the first round of adoption, but then the second round of adoption is going to be slightly more expensive, and it's going to get more and more expensive year over year. But internally, that forecast was getting cheaper and cheaper and cheaper and cheaper, and so they just weren't lining up in terms of what we could pay from a direct response level versus what we were actually getting. And so we needed to change, and so then we started to model and created this ELTV forecast based off of a number of signals that we're picking up off of IP addresses, off of what they were ordering, off of lookalikes. That then created a more robust, like, we can anticipate getting X amount of dollars off of this user which then allowed us to go into a CAC to ELTV ratio. And then we could say, great, now we're judging channels off of whether or not they are delivering a 2-to-1 or a 3-to-1 CAC to ELTV ratio, which allowed us to open up channels, right? So affiliates was actually one channel that we have probably the best quality from, but had historically not spent that much under the impression that affiliates were just taking demand generation from other channels and were kind of just stealing conversions. We then started to realize just from looking into the data that this wasn't true, that if we cut spend on other channels, affiliates stayed strong, so that wasn't stealing any traffic. And the ELTV was super, super high, but it was the lowest CAC in the program, so it was actually able to then double my ELTV, or my CAC on affiliates, doubling the program output on terms of volume, and still maintain a 2-to-1 CAC to ELTV ratio, which was huge. So now affiliates is like our second largest channel, and it was our fourth smallest channel.
So it's really about understanding the unit economics, right? And then from there, looking at not just for your overall portfolio, but for both each customer segment, figuring out what are the profitable segments so that you can then look at a CAC to LTV and make it a lot more sophisticated, which has allowed you and us to go out to market and really expand and really change the view of channels for your company, right?
Yeah, it opens up a lot, right? So if you move away from just CAC, you can then go into the unit economics of everything else. So for instance, if we look at like the average, if I looked at the process of going after purely CAC over the last 6 months, the average cost per CAC might have been $250. But let's say the cost per registration was 70, and we noticed that throughout the course of 6 months of monitoring, we had a correlation of a 2-to-1 ratio on registration to purchase, right? With that type of information, instead of setting up the entire program to go after the bottom of the funnel conversion and the highest possible cost, we can retrain and go after the registration and get registration for way cheaper. And if we get registrations down to a $20 cost and it still maintains a 2-to-1 ratio, we just divided CAC in half, right? And we weren't able to do that until we were able to see like what is the cost of a registration to us? Like, is that important, or do we just need the CAC? And that literally was our board. Like internally we were saying we need to blend, we need to do this, and externally we needed to report something else, right? And so it just became this awkward kind of divide between, like, internally we were optimizing for ELTV, externally we were optimizing for users and CAC. It's odd. Anyways, we're there now. They like ELTV. It was a painful 3 months, but we're here.
Yes, it's definitely gotten very sophisticated quickly. And I think you kind of mentioned another point in there that I want to dig into a bit more. And that was kind of the quality of data and how you're feeding data back, right? Because I think that's a big challenge that marketers and people have these days, especially in the subscription business, right? It's easy to get that first box, but understanding which signals that you're moving back when you're making marketing, because not all users are created equal in that first subscription. So can you tell us a little bit about kind of how that's developed and where that data is being used in your marketing and acquisition?
Yeah. So we're now, so so data's weird for us. We have actively been investing in building out our internal capabilities over the last 2 years. So we have this thing called Sunrise, which is our internal kind of data management platform that takes in all of our APIs from all of our partners now and mixes it with our own internal information and then passes back. So for instance, it's something we use with Facebook. So instead of passing back like the actual purchase value for the box, we send back now our estimated ELTV, and that allows us to train the algorithm for value-based conversions as opposed to purchase-based conversions. But that's later on down the line. Starting off, we had all of this kind of data, and it was a lot. And so we started to put it into kind of the bare minimums and started organizing that data. And then once we got the data organized, we were able to then start to see the correlating paths, which showed us that I like to think of it as journaling, right? Like, it's hard to kind of see if you're in it every day, the correlations over time, but when you look back, it paints a really clear picture that certain people are going to buy your boxes and are going to stay a lot longer than other people. The reason why this is important is that, especially as we move more towards programmatic, we are really allowing the AI to do most of our acquisition for us. And so you really have to set up the pipes and make sure that they're working. The one thing you can actually control mostly is creative at this point. But once you get the AI going, it typically goes off and hunts for you. And if you're not paying attention to your data and you're just going after the cheapest possible conversions, you're now training the robot to go after the cheapest possible conversions for you forever, right? And so I've chatted with our Facebook reps and stuff like that. And while the active learning process for campaigns can change within 50 conversions, the overall account ID that's associated with can take upwards of 6 months of continuous data to re-automate the algorithm and the positioning that you want it to go at, which is a really expensive mistake to make, right? So like that's why I think like the data piece is honestly probably the most significant, and not even if you're not doing anything with it right now, like just capture it, like just gather it now, because that's what we did. The first 2 years, we didn't really know what to do with the data. We just collected it and just held on to it as much as possible. And then, like I said, about a year and a half ago, we hired a data science team who had a warehouse of 3 years of data to go through and just set it up. And it took about a year of organizing and some third-party partnerships like LiveRamp and Experian and stuff like that. But now we've got, I would say, a pretty accurate forecasting model that we feel pretty, we're pretty confident that, I mean, we're making really big decisions off of it, so I hope we're confident in the forecast. It's working.
So far, so good, right?
So far, so good.
Yeah, and I think that's really important, just kind of the role in acquisition today of data. A lot of it's math, right? When you look at the role of marketing at Sunbasket, kind of how does math fit into it? I feel like these days more and more it's about the data and the math.
Yeah, and that's I think where we tie in the digital economist idea, right? So I think it's this evolution from taking a micro lens when you're acquisition. So when you're in the fields and you're like down there and you're saying like, I'm willing to pay this for my CAC and I'm willing to pay, what's my blend between SEM and affiliates and paid social and do I get my pod? Like when you're in that ground, that's great. That's micro. You're on it. I call that the small data. You can optimize your results. You can optimize your campaigns based on that. You can get daily and weekly data. But then there's the macro view. Once you've been there for a bit, you got to pull out and you got to kind of you got to get the bigger 50-foot view, right? So it's like, what does all 100,000 of those conversions look like together and what picture does that paint? For instance, when you do that kind of stuff and you pull out, you can actually say odder things, right? Like, hey, yeah, I know that females between a certain age are more likely to convert, but actually more interestingly is that if the first box order value rate is over a certain dollar percentage, they are most likely going to stay at a 75% rate higher than anyone below a certain dollar rate, right? Which then my entire promo strategy is dictated by that now, our entire acquisition strategy is based off of that. But those are weird data points that we wouldn't have known, right? If we didn't correlate and we didn't collect and we didn't start to ingest and kind of look at things in the aggregate, we would know to go after the right demographic and psychographic, but we wouldn't actually know what were the underlying little nuances and levers that we could be pulling that could ultimately help. And that's the macro point, right? And so I think that there's a point for every company where you can get really far on the direct response micro view, and then that starts to plateau and it gets expensive and you start to scratch your head as to why things aren't working. And then you have to kind of shift gears and go into great, how do I then take all this rich data and now take it to the next level? That's the actual scale, right? That's getting to that point isn't the scaling. The scaling is evolving from that point to the full funnel.
Yeah, agreed. And it's been very instrumental in the strategy these days, right? When we look at the different channels, when we feed back data, it's what's allowed you to really kind of crack the code on certain channels. And kind of on that strategy, when you think back over the years with Sunbasket and how we've grown and how the acquisition models have changed, what's one thing that if you had known, you guys would have done differently or you wish you had known when you started?
Oh, gosh. Yeah, I think it would actually have been just how expensive doing this incorrectly the first time was going to be, right? So not throwing numbers around for shock and awe, but we made a bet last year on some direct response marketing that was a little over 20 million in spend, and it did not work out the way that we wanted it to. And not only did we have all that spend and we not get the users we wanted, but we also spent 6 months training the algorithm on a huge amount of spend for users that were not ultimately good. And so now we're actively in a process of readdressing our entire active user base to figure out where the quality slips were and allowing them to, it's very complicated, but allowing them to churn out while I bring in enough acquisition to make up for them. But it's still there were 6 months of hard work and spend to bring those users in that we now understand are not going to be users that we can keep for very long. And so how do we get rid of them not get rid of them, but how do we phase them out in the best possible way that is both optically not going to harm the business, but also won't like ruin the business economics at the end of the day. So that's kind of that volume question, right? Of like, how do I bring in 5,000 quality users a week to make up for the 5,000 crap users from last year that I'm churning through, right? And that's been interesting. And then also just really wishing we had some of these early detection signs sooner, right? Like some of the things that we found in the forecasting were just like almost no-brainers where we sat back and went, piss, right? Like if we had this on as a filter for targeting since the beginning, that would have made so much sense, and we probably would have been in a much better quality standpoint sooner, right? And it's little things, like things such as just putting a college degree filter on things, right? Like smallest little nuances, but like that's a huge piece for our forecast. If you have a college degree, the likelihood that you're going to retain is in the 80% projectile. Sorry, I lost words, but you know what I mean. It's a huge sign for us that if you have a degree or if you've indicated you have a degree, your likelihood to retain is higher. And that's if we could have put that in place 4 years ago, probably would have saved us a lot of bad spend.
So it's really thinking about kind of the foundation ahead of time and planning for it, right? Mm-hmm. Because I know when you're in that startup mode, when you guys were trying to move really fast, it can be expensive and hard to put it in place, but it pays dividends later and would have really helped, right?
Well, yeah, and see, that's the case, is that like if they had put these filters in at the beginning, we wouldn't have grown as quickly as we had grown, and we wouldn't be able to do what we're doing now if we hadn't grown quickly as we had done. So there's this weird cart before the horse, right? Is that like you kind of have to do the build the rocket and take off with it at the beginning, and then hope that when you get there that the amount of work you did was in the right direction, right? You can't avoid that situation. You can't jump immediately into needing to build an audience because you don't have the funds to develop an entire audience if you're starting out. And then if you did start out and you're now at the place where you've gone through the early adopters and you now need to train a new audience to be your next level of adopters, you needed to get through that messy, expensive part first. And I think that's the scary part, and that's where it gets a little hard in startup world and in subscription boxes, because it's a hard method, and retention's the really hard one, right? So it's we couldn't put the filters in place. I know that in hindsight, but I wish we could have. Like my job would be easier today if we had done that then, but I probably wouldn't have a job today if they had done that then. So tomato.
Speaking of the good growth, right? What is one of the biggest changes that you've done recently that's allowed you guys to really get great growth?
So I would say one of them, can I talk about the affiliate channel?
Yes,
yeah,
please
okay,
do.
Sweet. So when I came in, affiliate was probably our 5th spend channel in terms of like how much we were spending. And as I mentioned, it was kind of the black sheep in our family. We didn't think it was doing that much. We assumed that Facebook was our golden child, and so we were putting a lot of money into Facebook and assumed that any program that was delivering users at smaller CAC than Facebook must be stealing the CAC from Facebook. Oh man, so that was a fun one to fight through. So what we did was, once we started to get into the ELTV modeling, as I mentioned, we were able to then start to see the CACs. We did a couple of rather odd tests, right, where we would go from spending $1.5 million a week in media spend to nothing the next week, to $1.5 million to nothing. And then I just wanted to see, like, literally which levers were controlling what, right? Like if I turned off the water on Facebook, what other channels were going to dry up? And immediately you could see like branded SEM trickles down, other things that were more demand focused or were just kind of harvesting awareness started to go down when we cut the Facebook spend, but affiliates didn't. Like it was a solid, continued to give me my users, continued to hit my budget, even when I cut spend across from other channels. That allowed us to take affiliates from the 5th smallest channel in my spend case to now it is the 2nd largest, and I am currently trying to figure out how to replace my Facebook spend with my affiliate spend, because Facebook is not, like it's not, the quality is not there. Also, additionally, what's weird is that, we're talking about things I learned, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Is that, so again, in this process of debunking the golden child of Facebook, was that we had built the business on it, And then as we started to really get into our internal Sunrise, it was the one channel that actively had users taken away from it. So the platform was telling us 2,000 users, but Sunrise would say 200. And it was this really interesting, we're still trying to figure out why, because we have everything optimized so that it shouldn't be counting impressions at all within the platform, but it's still triple counting users. It's really weird. But those are things that we were able to then uncover, and not only uncover, but go back to Facebook and say, your platform's wrong, and it's wrong by this amount, and oh, by the way, here are your quality of users, and no, we're not spending that much, so start working with us or we're cutting. And it was an empowering moment when you're like, both like, I need Facebook for my users, but also another moment to come back and be like, your users are kind of crap, and if you don't fix them, I'm gonna pull my money out. And for them to be like, oh, we gotta fix this. That makes sense. But yeah, so that was a big one, was being able to go back to them with data and say, not good.
Yeah, it was definitely kind of a cross-channel total portfolio view, right? And I think Facebook was a huge part of the affiliate. I think another piece, though, that's been really interesting, kind of as you and I have been working together and looking at it, is how an affiliate and search you can start to play together to actually get a lot more benefits on Google too, right? Yeah. Do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, that's actually a really great. So this was one where internally we had this idea that we needed to do non-branded search, right? That in an appropriate SEM kind of campaign or marketing mix, we needed to be doing some type of non-brand. Non-brand is really expensive. No matter how I touched it, I couldn't get CACs below $400. And the quality was, it was okay. It wasn't bad that I should turn off the channel, but it wasn't great that I should pay $400. But what we were able to then do was to say, okay, well, I don't want to pay $400, but affiliate partners can get this for way cheaper than $400. Like, they've got scale, they can go into this. So instead of pulling my money into non-brand and doing it internally and running this whole thing myself and paying out the nose for that, I poured it all into affiliates instead and said, you guys go do my non-brand, you guys handle the harvesting the intent on people outside of my brand, and pull it back, right? Because the CACs I'm paying them are going to be like $75, $100, right? And I'm never going to see non-brand CACs that cheap. I know this, right? And if I didn't have that visibility across all channels, I wouldn't have been able to say, no, it's not smart for me to do this. Like, I would be sitting there going, no, I have to do my own non-brand because that makes sense. But at the end of the day, no, in our industry, it actually doesn't make that much sense to do your own non-brand, especially when you think about it, the number one non-brand search term that's working for subscription business are reviews or on people talking about your subscription, and that's all controlled by affiliate partners anyway. So you're just competing against that space. So it's that kind of stuff that it allows you to say, instead of saying, I need to be in all these channels, you can step back and go, no, I don't actually need to be in these channels. And in fact, it's one of the things that we're currently kind of considering even for Facebook, right? Like, as we hit this point in which Facebook CACs are getting too expensive for us to go after, it makes us think, are there affiliates who can use Facebook? Are there other people who can use Facebook that are going to be able to do this cheaper than I can and still deliver the same amount of volumes off of Facebook, right? And the answer is yeah, right? Like, if you're competing for, you're running 20 of them, you have, it's economics at scale, right? Like, I'm just one person, one SKU, you've got 20, you can balance that spend because you're gonna get more conversions than I ever would. It's smart, but it's also scary because you're handing over a lot of pieces to different people that you don't necessarily get to control, but data will help you.
Right, yeah, I think there's kind of two things that you mentioned. The data is really important, but then it's also ensuring that you're not operating the channels in silos, right?
Yeah.
Like, traditionally, I know at LQ we'll see kind of a lot of people who will think that search should be managed by one team, an affiliate should be managed by another, and Facebook a third. But what you kind of just mentioned, and I think where we've been able to get great growth, is when you remove those walls and you actually start thinking about the customer, right? It's the same customer, it's what channel can get you that customer most effectively. Yeah. And that's what we've been able to do in a way together, right? Start removing those silos on Google and look at the data and just keep testing where can we get the best customer. It's because it's the same person searching that keyword, but what channel and what ad you show them, and is it a partner, is it your own, can really change the quality and retention, as you've seen, or the cost.
And also it's important to realize, like, Facebook is a great channel, but not because it's a great marketing channel. It's just a very populated channel. There's a lot of impressions to be had there, and that's why Facebook is a great channel to go to. But it itself is not a great marketing channel. Like, it's ubiquitous. You don't know for sure if your ads are actually being seen because it counts any newsfeed load as a serve, right? So it's a weird impression game, and once you get to the data, you can actually say, well, I'm paying X amount for 200 million impressions on Facebook. Is it more cost effective to get this 200 million impressions somewhere else, and will it deliver on the same ratio as Facebook would? We're making a bet that says, yeah, we bet it will, and so far it seems to be working.
Right. Yeah, and I think not just looking, as you've mentioned before, at the impression, but this is where the first-party data has become so important, because you might think that 200 impressions in Facebook are worth X dollars, but as you actually start to look down funnel, as you start to watch the retention data, it really changes the economics that are governing you and where you want to go. And I think that actually plays into kind of another thing that you guys have been looking at, and I know we've been talking about, which is it's not just how much you're paying for the media and where you're buying it, it's that customer journey all the way along. And I think with that, conversion rate optimization has also been something that I know we've talked a lot about, and that how has that played as part of your strategy?
Yeah, so there's always this like belief, or the golden dream in any marketer, I think, is that how do I spend the exact same amount and get more users, CRO, right? Like conversion rate optimization is the only way that you can control that. And so it's a couple of things. Like once you know or are pretty sure that your targeting is in the right place, like this is psychographically and demographically where you want to be, you then only can control creative and your click-through rates and your conversion rates at that point. And so then you have to balance, like, what is a good conversion rate? And I'm just going to caution, like, not all the time is having a good conversion rate good, right? And so an example, we did an experiment where we had a real clunky join flow that had a bad conversion rate compared to our competitors. And we were told by all of our partners, this is a bad conversion rate. And we were like, sorry. So we fixed it. And conversion rate skyrocketed. It was great, 30% like overnight, wonderful. Created this new problem though called ghosting, which was users who came in and then would cancel before they ever got their first box, which was not a problem we had before. And so we improved the conversion flow and everything started looking better, but then created this whole monster on the back end where we now had ghost followers that we were paying CAC for, but we actually never saw as even a first box. So be careful with conversion rate, right? Like not having a really high conversion rate isn't always great. Like a little bit of friction might actually be okay for, scrubbing out the low quality users in the funnel. But at the end of the day, that is the platforms and the processes themselves are taking away all of our ability to actually do anything on platforms, right? Like 3 years ago, if I had gotten up here to talk to you about growth strategies, it would be about how we were slicing and dicing audiences to like target and like how we were optimizing the algorithm against the first 1,000 impressions to get the highest CTR across 100 different ads and then running that ad. There were multiple ways to have done that. And over the last 2.5 years, those have all been stripped. By the end of the year, Facebook will make it impossible for you to even control your budgets because that's going to move to CBO, which is campaign budget optimization. So you tell it how much you want to spend and it spends it for you. So really, at the end of the day, the only thing you can control at this point is the creative you present to people and whether or not that creative gets people to click through and buy. And so that is why we're now kind of evolving into this, like, there are multiple stages of this funnel. We have to tell them multiple different messaging at each piece because the person at the awareness side who's just learning about us is not going to be ready to buy. And if we show them a buy message too soon, they're going to get turned off and turn off. So it's becoming this like really weird dichotomy of like now the only thing we can really control are the pipelines of the customer journey and making sure that anytime that we are interacting with the customer that we are doing so at the best possible positioning at that channel at that time. It's a lot.
Sounds like it.
Yeah,
I know,
it's
I've
been
been
fun.
through it with you for sure. But that's also why the signals that you're feeding in are so important, because as the automation is coming in, it's becoming more and more important to make sure that automation is dealing with the right signals, right? That's something we've talked about and we see is the conversion rate optimization is really important so that the users are seeing what they have, but at the same point in time, so is making sure that what you're measuring through that whole flow and giving those signals back with the ELTV, signaling to the systems, to Google, to Facebook, to your affiliate partners, this customer is high value, this one isn't, because it's not all created equal. And the algorithms will think they are if you're not actually putting the right signals in, and that's key. But I think that also kind of leads to a good point that you have, kind of the last question is, You've talked about, you just mentioned where we were 3 years ago in the industry and what happened. When you kind of look for Sunbasket, if you were to look forward, what would be the next chapter for Sunbasket?
Yeah, so I see us moving away from a rigid subscription model because a once a week really expensive box is hard to maintain. And we'd like to keep people on longer than a 6-box kind of cadence. It is pretty long, but I see us moving away from that. I see us moving away from dinner. I think that like the purpose, or at least everything I've heard internally, is to move away from a meal kit subscription box and into a healthy meal lifestyle brand, right? Where you can come to us for, so some things that are gonna be coming out this summer that we haven't announced yet, but you'll see probably by July, is the Sunbasket Marketplace. So we're releasing about 200 and something individual products to go along with our meal kits that you can then add to your boxes that go from everything from bone broth soups to like snacks and dippers, and they range from kind of curated pieces so we're going out into the community and finding like smaller like mom and pop shops that don't have distribution arms themselves and giving them access to like our audience and kind of going that way, as well as expanding our ability. So we have like Sunbasket Fresh, which is like our own sauces that we're developing and creating, our own kind of like mixers and that kind of stuff. Pre-made meals, probably going to move into that. But it's going to move away from, you're not going to see food porn images probably in 6 months, and moving away from promo strategy also. Like I think in the last 2 years, that has been a real big one for meal kits, is like, what is the promo that we're getting on our boxes? And that's, I think, to succeed or to stay alive in the next 2 years, you're going to have to move away from that. We've kind of been in a price war, and that needs to end.
It's time to go after the high value, which I think is kind of the perfect segue. So thank you.
Yeah, of course. Thank you.
Of course. And just quickly to wrap up, as we have about 5 more minutes here, you heard a lot about Sunbasket, but also wanted to give you some quick background on where I come from, right, and working with Joe. So I have been at LQ Digital for a decade now, long time to be in the industry, and we've been working with Joe and his team for about 4 years. So with that, we've really helped Sunbasket grow, and we did that by using what we call kind of the Digital Economist philosophy. And what that's really based on is that not all customers are created equal. I'm sure you guys are very familiar with this. You might get 4 customers in a crowd to go sign up, but of those, one of them is just looking for that coupon, right? The deal. They're the deal seeker, they want the free box, they're gonna cancel right away. Another one is interested, but probably, will do it once or twice and then leave. And in those 4, there's really that one. And that one is the one that will be your long-term, long-value customer. And that's what we at LQ Digital seek to find, because what we believe is that, not all customers are created equal, and our goal is to help clients acquire customers, not to spend media dollars, right? We want to make sure that we find profitable customers, and this is where Joe and I have worked closely together and with our teams the last few years to really pull in data and start watching the profitability so that we can keep going deeper and deeper and optimizing to find those right customers. And we talked a lot about each of these, but we do that through what we call the 4 key pillars of digital economics. And we believe it's really about customers and not channels, right? In myself as a user every day, I'm going to be on all the channels. I'm going to be on my phone, looking at apps, reading content. I'm going to be searching on Google. I'll be out on Facebook. I'll be listening to the radio. I'm everywhere. But it's really about where you find me at the right time and finding that customer when you're ready and making sure that, as you mentioned, you show them the right message, the right creative, the right value proposition, and that you have the right experience. Because what it all comes down to is the unit economics. We at LQ Digital really believe in economics. A lot of us are economists by training, myself included, and so we're marketers, we put our marketing hat on, but we really believe it's important to understand the data and the math that goes behind it. And with that, for us, it's really about your portfolio's CAC to LTV. Because at the end of the day, you want the right customer, and you should really be channel agnostic. As long as you can find it for the right cost and the highest value, your next dollar should go wherever you can get that customer at the lowest marginal cost. And that's really what we believe and what we've worked closely. I think the affiliate strategy was kind of a good example. We're a cross-channel agency, affiliates one piece, but we've worked together to move media around and find the most optimal. And so with that, just kind of in closing, we're obsessed with LTV. We think you should always be looking at LTV and not just your first purchase value, especially in the subscription space. We believe it so much, actually, that we are willing to take risk and get paid on performance. And we do all of this from kind of a custom tech platform that we've bought and built, that ties end-to-end data together to make sure that we're looking at the true value of Sunbasket and everyone else's customers. So I think we're at time, but if you would like to hear more, Joe and I will both be in booth 401, so come see us and ask questions. We also have some beignets if you haven't had one yet. Thank you.